To front-load the Catholic conclusion to this review at the beginning, a film about a Jewish Icarus. And if Max is the Jewish Icarus in question, then what is the Catholic take that I could abstract from this story? It'd be hard to give this film any specific Christian reference point. The film restates as repeated reminiscences, Max Cohen staring at the sun, contrary to the advice from his mother. The result is temporary blindness, but in adulthood, the replay has more serious consequences. Staring at the sun. Getting too close to the sun is the myth of Icarus. Icarus's own flying contraption was held together with beeswax. So then it's beeswax. That's the Catholic take on this. Beeswax is not made by human hands. It's a case of nature naturing, as opposed to what is the work of human hands, which is creation, creating. Beeswax, as used in the Catholic religion's Paschal candle, referred to in the liturgy of the Easter Vigil Mass. This may sound very tenuous, but it does in fact contrast the difference between the God who creates nature and the nature that goes about creating. The flying apparatus of Icarus, the work of human hands, which is created in the hubris of wishing to touch the sun, is itself undone by the beeswax that held it together. When nature plays nemesis to man, who authors this? Who cast nature to play nemesis to hubris? So this is a science fiction film, but no black holes, nobody trapped in a computer simulation. What is the particular ruse in this film? Before I get to that, Pi, made by Darren Aronofsky, released in 1999, around 6 months before The Matrix went to box office. A different paradigm is employed, not asleep and awake or simulation and reality. What it presents is the personhood of the go board, the distinction between thinking and just being. This is forefronted by the Chinese practitioners of Tai Chi. As to the personhood of the game in question, Sol, Max Cohen's mentor, was originally a chess player, but retired from the literal mind game of chess. The board game Go assumes a personhood just because it is not a duel between two minds. Two may play, but the board constitutes a real third person. It intermediates, like the Chinese paradigm of Wu Wei, effortless effort. It is non-competitive competitiveness. It is for those content with their being. For Max, it seems Chinatown is a refuge for all those whose alienation is all-pervasive, except for their personal endeavour, the subject matter of their personal thinking, maths in Max Cohen's case. Thinking versus being. Just as a person who dwells just in thought is not really living, he is not in a state of existence where every fibre of his being is alive. Though he's fit for making podcasts, the thinking that consumes Max concerns a 216-digit number, a number which represents the name of God that can usher in the Messianic age. This is the ruse of the film. After all, the Hebrew alphabet doesn't terminate at its 10th letter. Hebrew has more than 10 letters. What is the difference between the specific 216-letter sentence and pi? The film gives meaning as what would seem to be the answer. Max extracts meaning from pi via the golden ratio. In essence, he needs to measure the infinite by the scale of man. Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man in the scene shown. There's little about this film which is Star Wars-like. No Jungian ideas, nothing mythological save for the myth of Icarus. But this film is compact and dense with ideas, and avant-garde in execution and in concept. It lacks references to black holes and computer simulations though, which I will helpfully remedy. The number pi itself, that is the fixed ratio of the diameter of the perfect circle to its circumference. In antiquity it became understood that it was an infinite number. It never repeats itself, in other words. The geometry of the infinite encapsulated by the simple divided circle. Before placeholder arithmetic, Euclid, the father of geometry, reigns supreme. Euclid, who gives his name to Max's computing mainframe. This seems like an irony of sorts. Although Max Cohen is the protagonist of this movie, I give a weird reading of this film. The real hero is off-screen. It's the female character Devi, and it is in fact her boyfriend Farouk. Devi is an East Asian woman, and her unseen but heard boyfriend Farouk is heard making her climax during the sexual act. At precisely that moment, Max's computer Euclid delivers the code that represents God. Later, in another part of the film, it is hypothesized by Max's mentor that the machine that calculates pi and analyzes its own computation ends up self-aware and spits out its own ingredients. What inference can one draw from this? That somehow Farouk has exited the simulation. He has won love in the form of Devi, enchanting her to go across the stream of convention. They've crossed the event horizon to enter reality. This is all off-screen though. Concerning Devi and Devihood, broadly speaking, it is the real metaphor of a woman's capacity to save man by giving him life. In other words, to make him feel alive. In any case, I can't think of any reason for the inclusion of South Asians with those names other than for the reason given. To Euclid, a machine that is like an immobile golem, the medieval idea of today's humanoid robots. Golems were capable of speaking truthfully as long as they had emet, the Hebrew word for truth, inscribed on their forehead. Being a film that more than touches on Judaism, its allusions to things Asian are oblique and recall to mind Genesis 25, Keturah and the gifts of the East. Eastern religions that originate with Keturah. Abraham's second wife after Sarah passed, one of which at least was the power to name things in other words. Here is the second more broader Christian talking point. Jesus, the name that got reduced from the purity of its original Hebrew into a universalized Greek name for the person the name refers to. The sacrilege of giving God a common name has now lost its sting. Although the film doesn't mention the Indian mathematician Ramanujan, it's a nice talking point, so I'll drop it in here. For people who do maths in their head, externally it looks like they're thinking, but are they being? Or are they conscious of their own being while they're thinking? An equation means nothing if it does not represent one of God's thoughts. That's one of Ramanujan's thoughts. He was famous for his effective formulae for generating closer and closer approximations to pi. Closer even than the Indiana state legislature's 1897 pi bill. This, to be deep in thought, makes me recall the maths joke about enclosing a herd of sheep by erecting an empty box of fencing and defining the inside as outside, and vice versa. From outside the sheep pen, the maths thinkers inside are unconscious of their own being, and from inside the sheep pen looking out, perhaps only mystics parallel what their absorption is in, which is the infinite. Infinite, meaning cannot be measured, or never ending, like some podcasts. This is among the true gifts of the East. Maths as a way to speak truthfully in a way other than Hebrew. The language of nature as another way of speaking of God. Here you need zero to speak of the infinite in other terms. The zero of the numeral system. Existence put on the same platform as the non-existent. Back to number and geometry. 1 divided by 0 is what YouTube maths geeks tell me is undefined. When you think of division by 0, you may think of the infinite, but I think of black holes. The point? The singularity is by which the infinite is defined, much like how pi is defined by its diameter. Its diameter may be measurable in human terms, but its circumference is not. The upshot of this review is that the number that represents the 216-letter sequence, the full name of God, first name, middle name, last name, that number is pi itself. And the further suggestion In effect, any machine that has computing power is actually running a simulation of the universe. I don't personally live in a computer simulation, I just spend a lot of time on the internet. In finality, the running theme of Pi, of Max's brain reflecting the world external to him, it finds its apotheosis. Max ends up compelled into depriving himself of the faculty which gives him his genius. A self-administered brain injury using a power drill. After which he now has equality with children. He can answer a child truthfully, being unconcerned if he is intellectually on par with her or not. One imagines he can now play Go as it is intended to be played. He's rediscovered the will to play that came before his soul's other powers. And that is the film's happy ending. Thanks for listening.